Welcome back to Inclusive Design 2024, brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Barrier Break and Intopia, as well as our Gold supporters, Infoaxia and Tetralogical. You can follow us on LinkedIn, on Mastodon, and on Twitter. And if you have questions for the presenters, post them using the hashtag ID24 hashtag, or you can use the YouTube chat. We'll be monitoring these to gather questions for our Q&A at the end of the session. A reminder that ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. And now I'm just totally stoked to be joined by my guest host, Ricky. Ricky, over to you.
It's wonderful to be joining ID24 from the east coast of Australia to introduce the next few speakers. And next up, we have Michelle Chu with Accessible Big Screen, Designing the Future of Inclusive Viewing. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. Again, welcome to ID24, and thank you for ID24 for having me to talk about TV accessibility, and I hope all of you have as much fun as I do today. Before I begin, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodian of the country for Australia. Today I'm coming from Naarm, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I would also like to pay my respect to all elders past and present. And as someone who has moved to Australia at the age of 15, I didn't actually get a chance to learn much about the history and the culture of the First Nation people. And it wasn't until I started working that I learned more about it. And there's still a lot that I don't know. I'm continuously learning. So if you're based in Australia, I encourage you to learn and look up like the traditional owners of the land where you're coming from today and maybe put them in the chat. But let's kick off that way. My name is Michelle. I'm a digital accessibility specialist and a researcher. I want to do an ID of myself. I actually can't see what's getting shown on screen. But I'm of Southeast Asia ethnicity background. I got dark medium hair. I'm wearing a really fun jumper today, which is gray. I don't even know what color that is, caramel, with different vegetables on it, like beetroot, turnip, carrots, corn, broccoli, which is a super fun jumper. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm joining from Naarm, which some of you know that as Melbourne, Australia. I've been working in the accessibility space for about 7 years now, kind of straight out of uni, learning accessibility kind of from the basic accessibility testing, then learning my way through how to write requirement, do design review. Now my role is kind of somewhat focusing on the half inclusive design research, but also doing accessibility as well. And hence that you see my face with many hats. I used to have 4, and then my colleagues like put more. So I have like many hats, like beach hat, cowboy, Macca's hat. I actually never work in Macca's, and a construction hat and a Santa hat. And currently I'm working for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, also AKA the ABC, not to be confused with the American one. And my role is mainly focused on mobile and TV accessibility. That's really my jam. I've been doing it ever since. Enough about who I am, and let's get straight to it. So in the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to go through some background stuff about how TV has been and some of the challenges we have over the years. And I guess, sorry, not challenges over the years, but challenges right now, I guess, when it comes to designing for accessibility. And hopefully with some background context in place, then we're going to go straight to the meaty stuff. We're going to touch on some categories like color contrast, typography, navigation, button labeling, motion. Maybe we'll see whether we have time to talk about some QR code. Some of them will be quite general design principle that applies to everything from like TV apps to broadcast, but some of them might be a bit specific to certain TV apps. So bear in mind with that. We've come a really, really long way since the day of the 12-inch analog TV. Not that I actually have seen this TV before. I mean, I've probably seen picture, but I was not born yet. So TV and broadcasting begins since the 1928. There were no closed caption back then. It is black and white, but it was a source of entertainment for family to kind of sit around the TV, watching what's going on around the world, knowing the news, etc. Then from 1950s, we jump a couple years, it started to introduce color TV. Also around the same time, that's actually when we starting to have control for TV. Back in the days, people actually have to sit around the TV and then kind of press a couple buttons to change the channel. They're actually starting to have a control for, and it is a wide one, which you need to connect physically to the TV and in the press. And there's only two functions. One is tuning the channel from one channel to another. Bear in mind, there's still only just broadcast back in the day. So you can change the channel or change the, that's two things. You can't even turn it on automatically with a remote. And it wasn't until a couple years then they starting to have remotes, kind of infrared remote to control the TV. Then in the 90s, we're again jumping quite fast. Technology starting to improve. And around 2000, digital TV, we went from analog to digital TV with better and better picture quality and sound. And then in the mid 2000s, we're starting to see the rise of streaming service like Netflix. And then around 2010, smart TV has become more and more popular and fairly common these days. Now we're back to the 2024. We're looking at about, in 2022 in Australia specifically, we have about like 56% of users using a smart TV, so a good chunk of it. 12% using an Apple TV and 18% using a Chromecast. So it's getting more and more people using the smarter version of the TV. Technology and accessibility features also have improved quite a lot. Back from we have just no caption at all, black and white. Now it's all colored and lovely and good. For example, to name a couple of them, we have screen readers where you're very similar to what you have on a website mobile. You have screen to built-in where you can navigate the TV by listening to the verbal cues, and to move the focus, you kind of just press the remote. I have actually many remotes on the table here. Move the focus and then accordingly. You can also, there's also stuff like you can connect your keyboard or your switch control to your TV to navigate as well if you don't like using a remote or have limited dexterity. You can scale your font these days, pretty cool. If the font is too small, well, you can scale it up to 130, which in my opinion, that's still a bit too small. That's specific, that's for Android TV. And they only introduced that, I think 2-3 years ago, which is, again, a bit late. And if you prefer to watch with audio description, all you need to do is toggle on audio description in your TV. And if you watch broadcast, you can have that on by default. Another feature that has gained kind of popularity is the ability to adjust caption styles and size in video player. You can customize how your your caption to be displayed, small, medium, large, and also ability to override the style, like to have yellow background and black text if that's your thing. And we're moving to a bit more, I don't want to call it futuristic, but a little bit more fun, cutting edge, I don't know, features where now you can also talk to your TV. Where you can speak to either to your remote or to your TV. A lot of TV these days have a voice assistant kind of built in. So you can say something like, hey, Alexa, play jazz. Hey, Alexa, watch channel 1. Or use it to type as well to do search. The other two things on the screen I had is the sign language avatar and sign language recognition and gesture control. These two are actually only available on Samsung TV at the moment, where for the sign language avatar, where it would basically translate text to sign language. So it's easier for people who have use sign language as their first language to understand what's going on. And I think it's only available in the US at the moment. And the sign language recognition as well, you can perform certain gesture to basically tell the TV what to do, but you need to connect a camera to your TV to do that. So definitely check that out later if you're based in the US and have a Samsung TV. But it's all great, lovely, 10 out of 10 from a user point of view with the breadth and depth of the accessibility features we have out there. However, for those of us that actually do accessibility, that's a bit of an interesting area. Making TV accessibility doesn't seem too bad, right? How hard can that be? Don't you just follow WCAG and call it a day? No, unfortunately not. So with the amount of makers, manufacturer, and different types of TV out there, we have quite a lot. And they all have different code bases, different operating system. Very much just a bit of Wild Wild West, where there wasn't really too much of a standard, and you can't really just build it once and call it a day. But basically, you can separate into two categories. The first one is the smart TV category. So these are usually have internet built in. They usually have like kind of app store built in the TV where you can download different apps to watch video from there. Sometimes, like these days, you also have games as well, which is wild that you can play games with using a remote. But overall, they're written usually in HTML and CSS. One of the key players, I think I mentioned a couple of times, is Samsung. It has emerged as one of the leader in the smart TV accessibility game, just in general support accessibility really, really well. The kind of second category is like a streaming device. It's like a plug-in thing where the device itself is connected to the internet. So it's almost like a plug-in mini computer plug into a monitor. I actually had one set up right now that is like a monitor. Then you have a Google TV connect to it via HDMI, which is really handy when I do testing at work. So some of the big players out there is like Apple TV. I also have one here. Apple TV, Google TV, Fire TV, all the devices. But they all have different coding language. So Apple one is written in you can written the app in different languages. Either you do Swift UI. I don't remember the other one. But they uses the Apple ecosystem kind of code, and Android is the same as well. But one thing I do want to call out, like Samsung, my brain, a Google TV and a Fire TV, they actually have different screen readers. It's wild. Even though they both Android, but their operating system, like the back end, is a little bit different. But I would say overall, Apple TV is probably the best one out there in terms of its support for accessibility. Also, just had a really nice ecosystem with the other mobile phones and tablets as well. But the downside is actually a lot pricier. So I think sitting around $250, which is 5 times the cost for Fire TVs. So what I'm saying also in AUD as well. So they might look the same from a consumer end, but they're not from a designer product end. But I have a couple of guidelines. I think it'll be good. I'm just going to share it. You can have a look after this. Because there's just quite a lot of resources to talk about today. There's quite a lot of resources out there, but you can't really follow WCAG per se, because WCAG is really designing for that web experience, and really WCAG is just the baseline. Doing that itself is not going to help us to create an accessible but also very highly usable app. The first one I want to recommend is the Android TV Design Guidelines. They are created specifically with TV in mind. They include information like the fundamental concept, some of the visual style to consider, the color, type, motion, layout, etc., etc. So that it's really good to just check it out. They also have developer guide as well. And I think with a lot of coding specifically for TV, you just need to almost check out the manufacturer developer suggestion on how to code it. That will give you the best out of everything. The other thing I want to showcase is the Xbox accessibility guidelines. Some of you might be like, hang on a second, where are we talking about TV? I think a lot of learnings that when it comes to designing kind of console gaming experience is also applicable for TV. They're both controlled by a physical remote, kind of remote control. They both have a focus on graphic text and videos, and they both kind of play in that 2 to 3 meters different distance experience. So definitely go check it out. I like the contrast, photosensitivity, and mental health best practice. So that's that. There's also the Samsung TV text-to-speech developer guidelines, and also the Apple developer designing for tvOS as well. So check them out after this. But let's get into the meaty stuff. I can have fun with this slide and put my face and my cat on it to indicate that what an average distance of someone might be watching a TV from. And that is actually what my cat would usually sit at, blocking the TV sometimes. So actually really annoying when I'm trying to watch the caption and like, you're blocking the caption, I can't read. In contrast to a phone and computer, usually a typical TV uses, as I mentioned, it sits about 2 to 3 meters. It depends on how big someoone's home is, actually what they prefer to watch from. But what they usually would have is a remote control that they can press the directional pad, and so the D-pad, 4-way directional pad, and make the selection, and rather than touching them on the element on screen. So that's the main difference you had. There's also remote out there. So this is actually the LG TV, where you can move it in a way and start to have a cursor on top, which is almost like a mouse where you can just hover to an element and click select. So these kind of main differences, very much like physical control focus as a primary navigation, kind of changed the game on how we design for TV apps. The other thing I also want to mention, like the following is not going to be like exhaustive list of everything. I did try to jam quite a lot in there. But for me, these are all really important foundation and guardrails for us to create an inclusive and accessible TV viewing experience. Because there is quite, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different code base, there are different languages, operating system. I'm going to try to be as general as possible, but someone going to be a bit more specific. And that's why it's really handy that I show you all the guidelines earlier. So if you have specific apps that you're designing for specific TV or platform, you can go check it out yourself. And the other thing I want to mention is that the most important thing I think in designing for TV accessibility is that you just got to play around with your device and see how that works. Because you can't really design for it if you don't understand from cover to cover. So let's get into it. First one, color. Love colors. So a couple of do's and don'ts. So the following I would in the next kind of 20 minutes or so, I'm going to do it in the format of do's and don'ts, and with some examples as well. So for example, with color and contrast, do consider users going to watch the TV at various distance and daylight settings. So if someone have them TV kind of next to the window, if it's really bright, you want to make sure that whatever design that you have also can be easily readable in that daylight setting, but also at night as well. Trying to aim for text contrast 7:1 for text and then 4.5 to non-text element. And for those of you really familiar with WCAG, you'll be like, hang on a second, that's WCAG AAA requirement. Yes, we're doing a bit better than AA. Also, I think the contrast, the easier for users to read. We don't want users to kind of squint their eyes and trying to read what's on the screen. Don't use heavily pure white. So if this is actually you watching on a big screen TV, it's actually not that good. But I didn't use pure white on this background. For users actually, so you in general you don't see a lot of light mode apps around. It's usually in dark mode, so it's a lot easier for users to consume. Don't use oversaturated colors like a saturated blue or red or yellow. They are quite bright and not really good contrast in general. And don't use color only to indicate differences, or use color to communicate differences. But I'll show you some examples. So this one, where they have decided to use really bright whites on screen, it's actually quite painful. Sometimes I'm turning on, it's like, oh, it hurts my eyes. It's worse on low light conditions. So if you imagine you're watching this, you can try it out later on at night. If you're at night right now, perfect. Put it on TV and try to play that and see how that feels. So they had like really bright blue and it flashes in a bit as well. It wasn't as good. Another example is this is actually a Google native design that they have in Google TV. That's how what they used it. They actually have a color contrast. So for some of the show name that they're showing underneath the card, each of the card, they have about 5.16 to 1, so 5.1 to 1. Technically passes WCAG, but to be honest, I think that's even the font itself is a bit small. Usually we say 24 pixels is a good font size for the distance as well that you are going for. Like it might looks good if you're sitting on a desk kind of in that one meter distance, but as soon as you move further back, it's just not going to be as easy to read anymore. So try to aim for something like 7 to 1. If not, actually, I would recommend 12. Anything like the better the contrast, the better. But you also don't want like just white and black, because sometimes that's too bright for some users, especially when you're starting to have a lot of white on the screen. This is another examples where it was using color alone to indicate differences. So I did on purposely put it in gray. So for people who with color blindness, they're not necessarily good with understanding differences of color. In this case, it's actually not very obvious which one is in focus. Spoiler alert, is actually the play. It uses color itself to kind of differentiate that, hey, it is in focus. But usually my rule of thumb is always trying to put like put your design in grayscale. If you can actually still make meaning out of it, understand what's going on, then I think that's a pretty good design. Next. So for example, I had an example in here where instead of just using color, so it's nothing wrong with using color, but use color in combination with other things. Like you can use outline, can use a field in even text. So in this example where I had the next episode button, it was not only highlighted in color, but also to fill the background in and with the text on top. So it's really super crystal clear that which one is in focus. And the rest of the other stuff is in kind of plain color white. So the element that is in focus is really obvious. So check out the simdaltonism, so SIMDALTONISM. So they have a color blindness visualization where you can just install on your, I think only Mac and iPhone has it, where you can tell the differences. But there's also many color blindness visualization that's out there that you can look up after this. Number 2, use of text and readability. As I mentioned earlier, trying to use text at least 24 pixel large. If it's too small, people can't see it. What's the point of having that? The other thing is use text sparingly. If you can, try to break it up to a smaller chunk so that user can quickly scan what's on the screen. Choose clear, readable fonts with a larger size and line spacing as well. Don't like these are just basic WCAG stuff. Like don't bundle your text too close to each other. Also make sure that there's always a darker gradient behind text. Often we see there's a lot of preview area on the TV space where you just have an image and it got text on top of it. It's really hard to see, so make sure a gradient for that. Don't use lightweight fonts. Try to aim for at least like 400 weight. Super small font type might look 10 out of 10 on your monitor, but when it goes to a 3-meter viewing experience, that's going to be blown out and might not be as easily readable anymore. I will share something at the end of the session as well. There is an article from Vision Australia that talks about typography, so definitely check it out. Also, don't expect people to always sit at a 2 to 3 meter distance. I know I did mention that usually they sit at 2 to 3 meters, but often some people might doing kitchen, cooking, they might 5 meters distance. They might actually go really close. So making sure your design is flexible enough and readable enough in different distances. or maybe they have just a really large TV, like 80 inches, but like could be 5 meters away. Who knows? So do try to make sure that there's gradients behind the text and when there's image overlap with it. So I have an example in here where we have Timothy Chalamet show that is a rainy day in New York. So what happened on the screen is that the promo image kind of had text on top of it as to show what's the show, the name, the show of the movie, the name of the movies. But unfortunately, that also overlapped with the description text they have on screen. So my recommendation usually is make sure that always is gradient behind the text, the description text you have, so that it doesn't, like any other image, wouldn't block it. One way to test it is always to do it is that find a really light image or just do a bright white image, because if it meet contrast with white with the black on top of it, then you're fine. Another example I had in here is that this is really nice. Your background, your promo image didn't really have any text, but the text is always sitting kind of within the boundaries of the gradients, so it's always easy to read. Cool. Next up, also don't expect users to read too much in the TV environment. So we have an example in here where it's like a live stream schedule where they just have so many texts. Also, I can guess which one is in focus, and it's actually Everyday Gourmet with Justin Schofield, where that's the one in focus. But imagine reading this from if I put myself backwards, it's so hard to read and almost a bit information overload as well. So my recommendation is kind of, if I were to fix this design or update this design, I'll probably look into reduce the image a little bit, or maybe just cut down the length of the description text a little bit. Yeah, so that's a couple of examples, some goods and not so good. Number 3, D-pad navigation and focus indicator. Navigation on TV fundamentally is quite, as I mentioned, is quite different from mobile and web. Mobile and web, they're all very linear, where it's usually, you reading things in logical order, left and right, top to bottom. But in TV, it's a little bit different. Think about, you're almost like designing just for like a tab order for keyboard, but you have the ability to navigate either from left to right or top to bottom. You can like decide to jump up, kind of skip through it. You can do that. So these are referenced from the Android Material Design Guidelines, where they're 3 principles for navigation. So first, make it efficient. Make it really fast and simple to get to content. It shouldn't be hard to kind of jump around to go to places. Everyone wants to access information instantly. So try to use a minimal clicks and organize your information in a way that requires the fewer screens or press. Number 2 is the predictability, predictable. Follow best practice of recommendation to make navigation predictable to users. You don't really want to reinvent the view and reinvent the navigation patterns. Trying to have a look of what's out there and follow that similar patterns. Often if you do something new, it's not that you can't do something new, it's just to making sure that's actually predictable to users, and you can do it by testing, testing with real users. Number 3 is intuitive, so make navigation simple enough so it seemingly support wider adoption user behavior. Don't overcomplicate it by adding unnecessarily amount of layers and buttons. It's just going to confuse users. So do make sure that focus is always predictable and logical. Do make sure there's a clear path to all focus element. If I can see it, I should be able to get to it easily. Don't have 2 different focus indicator style within one screen or across the app. If you always use an outline for a card, stick with it. If you always use underline is probably not a good example, but you get the gist of it. Don't leave users wondering where they're in the app. I see actually this one quite often. If I started navigating through the app. If I walk away, go grab a cup of tea, and I come back, I should be able to tell exactly where my focus is and navigate continuously. That shouldn't be like, oh, where did that go? No, there shouldn't be any of that. And don't shift focus to an unexpected place. That's the same thing with your web app development. Don't do anything unexpectedly. Give users control. And I did mention previously, follow native pattern. Unfortunately, sometimes native might not be the best. So one of the example I have in here is actually Apple TV, where the default focus styles they have for everyone is actually by enlarging the card size and adding a text element underneath it. And the one that is in focus is in settings. It was not obvious usually, like in especially in distance as well. When you looking at it in a distance, the size differences is not as easy to figure out unless you are doing this day in day out. Of course, you understand it. But for someone that who are new to using Apple TV or new to using your apps, that could be confusing. I have another example where they have adopted a similar pattern where, both have enlarged focus and selected. That didn't work so well in this case because not all of the cards has the title name within the artwork. So if you see the continue watching one, I would have no clue which one, what's the show name, what is what show. So I have to actually physically press up to find the show and be like, oh, that's the one that I watch. That's the one I want to watch. Yeah, so that's one example. If I were to change it, I will make sure that's always title everywhere and have a much clearer focus indicator. By the way, Taskmaster is awesome. Don't leave user wondering where they are in the app. Do you want to guess which one is in focus? Which one is selected? So this one, I actually made this screenshot a while ago. I think if I remember correctly, animation is actually in focus is a marginal difference that I think. Unless feature is selected. I actually don't know anymore. And that's proved the point that it's confusing at a glance that you just don't know which one is in focus. If I were the designer, I'll probably make sure that there's always a outline so it's really clear, okay, animation is in focus, and underline to show that which one is currently selected. There's also another example here I have. I like watching Below Deck. It's funny. It's my reality getaway, where they have a similar pattern where they have an underline for a selected state and using an kind of fill button for a currently focused one. And that's also aligned with kind of the tab pattern you see on web as well. So if you can adopt similar pattern already from other, I guess, user interface, do it where it makes sense. Cool. Another more example where you have just one thing I do want to mention is when you put outline, always make sure there is a gap between your card and your outline. That would make sure that it always meet color contrast, because sometimes it depends on the image card, kind of gradient kind of around the border. Sometimes you might have really white. Imagine a card is pure white or really light. That wouldn't contrast well with a light blue color. So always making sure there's a padding and use dark background, and you should have a really 10 out of 10 focus indicator that meet contrast. Okay, how are we going time? Oh, good. Okay. Number 4, use of labeling and hints. This is where the screen reader comes in. Navigating using TV is very different from mobile and web. It is much, 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 much harder with screen reader as well. As I mentioned, one thing is that the navigation style is not linear. You can go 4-directional anywhere you want. And also different manufacturer have different screen reader as well. So for example, in smart TV or CTV, that's the shortcut people calling it these days, you can actually, with the text-to-speech software, or screen reader, you can only navigate to button only. You can actually can't you can't use your button to navigate to the text. And for Apple TV, it's actually a little bit better. You can do both. You can choose actually which version you want. If you want navigating to button only, you can do that. You want navigating exploration mode, like everything on the screen, you can also do that as well. In Android, there's only one way, which is you can navigate to both text and the actual button, but then the focus works a little bit, the actual physical device focus and the screen reader focus are like a little bit disjointed as well. It's hard to explain. You almost have to just test it. And that's why you need to test and figure out how it works and whether when you're coding it, whether that works or not. And the thing is with forward directional navigation, it's not linear, as I said. So it's quite confusing and disorientating, especially when you have like something that's like a 2-column like what I have on the screen, where you have text on the left and then you have like buttons on the right. What happens if I press left from start workout? Does it go to the image? Does it go to text? Where do I go? It's not as straightforward per se. But using labeling and hints. So this is mainly going to be screen reader related. Do try to group relevant information into one focus where you can. Try to use support text to communicate what each of the arrow button would do. So for example, let's say if the left button is going to open the menu, then you say press left to open main menu, or press down to explore for more options, stuff like that. That really would help enhance the experience than just telling them this is a watch button, this is an episode button. Not as good. So go a bit above and beyond for that. Also have code in place as well to auto-announce when username landed on a new screen. So when they landed on episode screen, say now in episode screen or now in show name episode. And also try to always provide verbal feedback for confirmation. So if there's a toggle, when they've toggled it on, then you have audio description on, audio description off. So it's just really clear. And other thing is just don't just only test with screen reader. I did say this mainly more applicable for screen readers, but a lot of switch control these days, you can actually they kind of read the same label in a way. So for Android TV, you have switch control connected. You can actually have switch to verbally announce the button name. So make sure that also works for people who use switch as well. And same for, I think in Apple TV, there's something called hover text, just introduced a couple years ago. It's almost like a large text because they don't really have large text in Apple TV, but you can hover to an element where they would just zoom in a lot larger for you. So they use the same labeling as well. Examples. So using support text to communicate additional context. So I have an example where it is on about to go into a full episode list where it didn't announce now on, like recommendation will be like announced now on Fisk episode screen. So it's really clear where they're at. And then group button together in a meaningful way, which I will show you now.
More episodes, button. Series 2, 1 of 2. Series 2, Episode 1, Goddamn Flim Flam Man. Closed captions available. PG for parental guidance for people aged under 15 years. Duration, 26 minutes. Helen deals with a nuisance claim and Roz makes Helen attend a staff training session with Lindy Baxter Smythe. Ray's shredding for a reunion and the office acquires a new photocopier. 1 of 6. Press left to go to series selector.
So in this case, it actually did announce both if you have caught it, you will realize it actually announced the title and announced actually the closed caption in PG first. Because in that, the requirement, well, I put a requirement in that I think closed caption in PG is actually more important than the durations and the description. So we're actually putting it at the first announcement. Visually, from visual point of view, you can easily see that. So we want to bring that attention to screen reader users as well. So a group actually have that announced first. Then we have the timing, the duration, 26 minutes, and then description. And then at the end, you'll also hear say 1 of 6. that is to communicating how many items there is on the list so that people knows that, okay, I can press down to navigate for more. So always include a label, traits, the trait, which is button, and the state. There's no state in here because you just play it immediately. But I'll show you the other example.
Fizz. Selected. Series 2. 6 episodes. 1 of 2. Button.
So we'll say
Series 1. Selected. Series 1. 6 episodes. 2 of 2. Button. Double tap to select series, then press right to navigate to episode list.
so in this one, it will tell you
More episodes.
it will tell you that double tap to, sorry, it's meant to be tap to select series and press right to episode list. So it tells you exactly where to go to the episode list and also tell you that it is selected, which one is selected and how many episodes are there and how many lists there is within that series. So using hint text really, really helps to make that experience a lot better. And this is Apple TV actually. All right, I'll go with that. Okay, I'll speed through the last bit. Other consideration, flash and animation, try to avoid bright contrast, always try to respect device autoplay settings. And if you had toggle on, so what I meant by that is that autoplay settings, a lot of the device these days would have autoplay preferences available on device. So making sure app also respect that. On top of that, I would suggest to also have a autoplay toggle in the app as well, so that for people who want to control separately for different apps, they can do that. The other thing is make sure that when screen reader is used, there's a user is using a screen reader, have the autoplay features off, because that's actually quite distracting with the verbal cues from screen reader announcing, but you're also playing a trailer at the background with sound on. And also don't force autoplay trailer for everyone. Not everyone likes it. This is an example where you can have toggles on off with sound on or sound off. QR code. Make sure that you have really clear instruction on how to scan QR code. Not everyone actually understand. So like use a phone or tablet cameras to scan the QR code. Have that text actually on screen. Also make sure your QR code is big enough, at least 30 meter by 30 centimeter by 30 centimeter. That is for 3-meter viewing this experience. So if it's 1 meter distance, 10 to 10 centimeters. Also think about timing as well. Make sure you have ample amount of time for people to scan and log in, if that's what the QR code is for. And try to always make sure there's many way to assess where the QR code is going to link to. So actual address on screen. And yes, please work really closely with your designers and developers. Accessibility do need to be considered at the very, very beginning. A lot of stuff that I mentioned today are very much design focused. Not that much was developer focused. So if it wasn't considered at the beginning, that would just refactor and cost time. Designer and developer also need to be quite familiar with how assistive tech works and settings, and really be open about different solutions and potential workaround. As I said, like some of native stuff might not work, it might not make sense. So use your I don't want to say use your brain, but use your gut feel, use your expertise as a designer, and think about whether that works or not. Key takeaway: be familiar with how each of assistive tech works on different TV devices, be consistent with native pattern and global pattern out there where you can and make sense. Think about color, contrast, navigation, typography, and labeling. And accessibility do need to be considered at the very, 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 very beginning. And I have a bunch of links that I will share on my social after this, and let's chat.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so
Wrap it on
much
the clock.
for such a engaging and interesting talk.
There's a lot of information as well, so apologies for that.
Yeah, it's a lot of really good gesticulating. Adrian actually has chimed in the chat with a question. Most of these interfaces are inconsistent with one another, and many users have multiple services/platforms.
Yeah.
How do you think this variation impacts users?
That's horrible. Almost like every time users have to using a different app, they have to learn it again and again, and then whenever an interface change drastically, then they have to learn again. One example I had was I think Netflix recently. So layout for iOS, tvOS usually is that they have natively they have a menu navigation on the top, and the Android is always on the left. They have recently do a switcheroo where Apple have started doing a left-hand navigation and Android starting a top. Yeah, it's just wild that there's some established what we thought it was established pattern are changing like that. I think we have a responsibility to conduct testing and talk to the end users and make sure that it actually makes sense. I mean, we don't want to stay in like the same. We don't want to stay in the same point over and over again. So it makes sense that sometimes we do change, but make sure we consult the right people and with a diverse user group as well, that it makes sense for everyone.
Yeah, I love it. I must confess, I own an Apple TV and their TV app specifically, when it changed to that side menu, I was and still am very confused in operating it, and I consider myself okay at computers. So yeah,
Why would you?
I don't know. Ricky, do you have any questions top of mind?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One is about that you work for the ABC, one of the two publicly funded public broadcasters in Australia, and you gave us a bit of a timeline of how TV has kind of developed. Is there an appetite for accessibility at the ABC now, or when you introduce accessibility stuff, do you meet resistance?
Yeah, it always has an appetite of doing accessibility in ABC. That's literally our vision statement is that ABC is for all Australians. So that includes accessibility in everyone as well. And also at the ABC, if you don't care about accessibility, you probably can't get in. We also are good people. If you're not good people, I always say that if you're not a good person, it's hard for you to get into the ABC. And everyone really cares. Even though we are a team of two, there's only two accessibility specialists at the ABC. But as my boss always say, everyone cares about accessibility and everyone do accessibility and understand the impact, the meaning behind it. So it makes our job a lot easier that we don't always have to do the fights. So yeah, we don't have as much pushback. My job makes my job very easy. I do have to educate people from time to time, so it's not too bad. I like sharing the gospel.
And you've covered a bit about the kind of the interplay between devices and people's individual settings and how they use it and what you can make available through the apps that you create. Are there plans to like make iView more accessible in offering things like being able to increase the font size of subtitles and all of that kind of stuff?
Should be. Currently, you should be able to do font size scaling for Android TV. I mean, within the app. We haven't on that. We don't have that in our roadmap at the moment. We're kind of trying to follow as much native as possible, rather than reinventing the view ourselves. But I believe caption right now, you should be able to, if you do device settings, we do listen to that in device settings. So if you have that enabled or do a different style in Apple TV or Android TV, that should come in for free, that you will see the caption change accordingly.
Okay. Okay. And just personally for you, I know that before ABC, you worked with one of the big four Australian banks. What was the transition like of going from like banking to broadcasting? Were there differences in how you approach it and that level of resistance that you might meet?
Yeah, I think the differences is probably a big one is money. The ABC also doesn't have as much money than a bank does. But in a broadcasting sense, I think when you take money out of the questions, it makes it a bit easier because at the end, you're like focusing on the people, the end users.
Yeah.
It go back to the original statement that I have, like, not a statement, but the vision statement that ABC is like, is for all Australians. So it doesn't really matter not it doesn't matter how much it costs, but if it is the right thing, we shouldn't stop access for people. If we stop access for
Right.
people, we're failing our job as a national broadcaster. We're not doing our job properly. So
Yeah.
it's a different people. It's just different people.
Yeah.
Different way of approaching.
Okay. Right. Well, we're probably coming to the end of the time we've got allotted. Eric, was there anything else from social media that came up?
Not that I'm seeing, but just Michelle, again, just an absolutely lovely talk, and like what a wonderful like sentiment for a place to work at. It just warms my heart to hear. So I'm glad you're
Mm.
able to help folks out in such a nice environment.
Let's do
Um,
it.
so
Go.
yeah, let's send this home. If you liked this session, and I don't know why you wouldn't, you can hit that YouTube like and subscribe button to receive updates for future events, including future editions of ID24, as well as upcoming talks. And speaking of ID24, it's brought to you with thanks from our sponsors, which are Barrier Break, Intopia, Infoaxia, Tetralogical, Intuit, Adrian Roselli LLC, Assistive Labs, the Law Office of Laney Feingold, Skyscanner, and Vispero. And we'll be back at the top of the hour with our next session, which is Dom Parker talking about inclusive game design, accessible mechanics, and UI. Hope to see you there. All right, bye-bye.